It is Tuesday. It is time for Why Libertarian. Another day in paradise, Liberty lovers. Coming at you every single week at this time slot, 5 o'clock on Tuesdays. Before I get rolling, got some new swag in, little Blue Star Union crew swag going. I got to throw this up on the screen just so everyone can see it. BlueStarUnion.com. These dudes are hardcore, man. Pro Second Amendment. Big on helping out education, nonprofit. They do a ton of good work. Go over to bluestarunion.com, check out their website, get some swag, see what they're doing. They got an interview up there. What was the most recent one? Oh, the one at Attilas Gym. That was fantastic. So if anyone's ever heard of Attilas Gym, that was the, basically, I guess, the man crush that Governor Murphy has right now on the owners over there at Attilas. Big love between those two. I think they're over $1 million in fines now from the state of New Jersey. So I think that was a fantastic episode. Those dudes are killing it. Another plug also, something I do in collaboration with Blue Star Union. We started a libertarian book club. I know, sounds super interesting, but actually it is fantastically interesting. We get a bunch of people together, a bunch of Liberty people from Jersey. We sit down, have some drinks, talk about some books. The most recent and the first one that we did was Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. The episode was absolutely fantastic. It's both up on my channel as a pinned tweet right now, as well as up on the Blue Star Union channel, as well as on our YouTube channel. So check those out. I'm also going to be putting out an abbreviated version, kind of like Anatomy of the State in 10 minutes. So make sure to check that out and subscribe. All right, cool. So last piece of business, as usual. I mean, you guys know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, share. In fact, I think at the end of this episode, I might be in social media jail. I don't know. We're going to talk about some stuff that's a little bit taboo, and I think some of the powers that be don't exactly like some of the names and things I'm going to be kicking around. So before that does happen, help me out with a like, help me with the algorithm so that if and when I get shadow banned, that I have at least something going for me in the process. And make sure to share it out there. I think there's a ton of people that could use this information, both people that are in the Liberty community as well as people that are just outside of it, because what we're talking about tonight is government boogeymen. That's what we're talking about. So before I get into some specific examples, what really kind of like made me think about this? Well, the most recent thing that's come up, actually two things are, one, an interview on Jimmy Dore's podcast with one of the Boog Boys that was had a couple of minutes of fame giving a speech out in front of a state capitol where they were protesting and assembled, peacefully protest. They were armed, as is their constitutional right to be so. And this gentleman gave a absolutely fantastic speech, so much so that it completely befuddled the reporters that were there. Because the words that came out of this dude's mouth, the guy's name is Magnus, that's what he goes by. The words that came out of this dude's mouth, when you watch Jimmy Dore's face when he's doing this interview, is incredible, because the things that they talk about, he thought this was going to be, you know, a white national or a white supremacist or a nationalist. He thought he was going to be talking about like anti-LGBTQ stuff and you know, how minorities are destroying the country, and is like completely the opposite, right? This dude's libertarian, bordering on anarchist. And like 99% of the stuff that came out of this dude's mouth, probably 100%, I was like, yep, I'm right there with it. Like that's my jam right there. And I was like simpatico with the stuff that he was saying. It was absolutely fantastic. And then something else has been the classification of the Trumpers at the DC Capitol incident on January 6th as domestic terrorists, right? Like this idea of this, you know, brewing domestic terrorist threat, this insurgent force, these seditionary, dirty underbelly of the American public that is coming forward, that is going to undermine and threaten our democracy, okay? These things have been mounting after this election. They've been mounting after these most recent events. And it started to like get me thinking like, all right, the government obviously uses propaganda. Like, I don't think if I polled like 1 million people and I was like, does the federal government use propaganda? If anyone said no, I'd be like, right, you're falling, you're under a freaking rock. Like, you know, have you not been paying attention in your sleep, right? Nick chiming in, one of the Blue Star crew. Actually, I think that pic in his profile is from Attilis. Very well timed there, Nick. Yes, BlueStarUnion.com. Go to the store. It's a tab right at the top. Go to the store, pick up some Blue Star Union swag. And thank you for tuning in, Nick. And as you notice, if you do throw comments and questions up, I do take them real time. So don't be afraid to become part of the conversation. But so if I polled 1 million people, does the United States government use propaganda? I think most of them would be like, fuck yeah, they use propaganda, right? Like, of course they do, right? They have to push a narrative. Propaganda is essentially marketing material, right? That's what it is. It helps them sell their positions. It helps get public support behind certain types of bills and laws and initiatives. Like, obviously they use propaganda. The question is, what do they use it for? Well, I think you might be surprised what they used it for, and some of it you might not be surprised, all right? The people that are, like, silent, the people that are sleepwalking through life right now might not even notice the propaganda that gets put in front of them, right? But one of the biggest, I would say one of the most impactful baskets of propaganda that the federal government and most governments use is to identify some threat, some boogeyman, some devil that we all collectively need to fight against, right? In order to try and stop the attack on the American people, or to stop the attack on our democracy and our government and our way of life, right? It is undermining the happy existence of American people. And so it is their job to find those boogeymen or create them out of nowhere if they have to try and build support for sometimes good things, but more often than not, it's very nefarious. It's very insidious what they're doing. They're trying to single out individuals or a group in order to be able to say, okay, this is what we have to stop. And then what's crazy is the people that they get to support the fight against this perceived threat are the same people that they end up stripping rights and liberties and freedoms away from in the process. So you collectively think, oh, we're doing our duty to save the country, right? But at the same time, on the back end, they're basically backdooring you, right? They don't even spit on their damn hand, right? Like that's what they do. That is their process. That's their MO. All right. So I'm going to take you through a little history lesson. I'm going to try and make this not dry. Like, I want to go through some of this. I know that there's a cross section of people. I try and look at my analytics. I get a cross section. It's like older folks that are like 50 plus, and then I get a bunch of people that are in like the 20 to 35 range. So I want to make sure that I'm kind of like mixing it up here and keeping this interesting for y'all. So the first thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to put you in the time machine. We're going back to the 1950s and the 1960s, right? This is 30 years before I was born, right? I did not live this firsthand. And again, I want to say that these boogeymen, a lot of times there's a morsel, there's like a small element of truth to the fact that we should be paying attention to these movements or these people or these things. And then there is the complete blowing it out of proportion, the nuclear freaking propaganda A-bomb that they use in order to then advance what they want to do, right? To advance their agenda and take shit away from you, all right? That is the playbook. You find something that is a small threat, you blow it out of proportion, and then you say we have to take these outsized measures to stop it, all right? So the first stop we're taking in the time machine is 1950s and 1960s. This is called the Red Scare. Anyone who's not familiar with the Red Scare, quick history lesson, World War II, we win, fantastic, all right? One of the countries that fought alongside of us, I wouldn't necessarily call them our allies, but they fought alongside of us, was Russia, because Hitler was a dumbass and decided to attack them at the same time that we were waging war with him. And so Russia ends up fighting the Nazis along with us. We end up winning, so much so, you know, the divide was so great between our two countries that at the end of the day, we took Berlin, split it in half, and put a fucking wall in the middle of it. Okay, how ridiculous is that? But so anyway, we fight alongside of the Russians against this common threat. Well, what happens at the end of it? Well, both of us build up our military forces to fight against Nazi Germany as well as Japan. And at the end of the day, we're the two biggest dudes in the schoolyard, right? There is a jockeying for position on the world stage. Well, what's the best way to, you know, anneal the country to continue to fight, right? Like, we just got done with this bloody war, like a brutal, bloody war in World War II. How do we get the country to continue to support the military-industrial complex that essentially grew out of World War II and out of Wilson and FDR's spending, right? How do we get the country to say, you know what, we need to keep that standing army, right? Back in the 1700s, we were like, standing army? No. We saw the shit that goes down with that. But all of a sudden in the 1940s and the 1950s, they were like, you know what? We've got some momentum here. We need to get the American people supporting a standing army. So what do? We throw out stuff like fucking McCarthyism, right? So we got McCarthy here talking about how there are enemies within. They are infiltrating our entire infrastructure. There are people in the State Department and spies all over the place. And you know what? There was a counterintelligence portion of it, right? There were Russian spies. There were people but they took that small kind of potential for those insurgents into the American infrastructure, into the government infrastructure, and they blew it up, okay? So he's looking for enemies from within, right? Now, here's the telltale sign of propaganda. The telltale sign of propaganda is those grand fucking statements, okay, that seem almost too good to be true or too bad or evil to be true. And then also there's typically a lack of consistency. So in this article, and this is an excerpt from Howard Zinn's History of the United States, People's History, it says, in this atmosphere, Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin could go even further than Truman. Speaking to a women's Republican club in Wheeling, West Virginia in early 1950, he held up some papers and shouted, "I have here in my hand a list of 205, a list of names that were known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party and who nevertheless are still working and shaping policy in the State Department." And everyone's like, holy shit, 205 commies in the State Department? We gotta get rid of those fucking guys. They're gonna ruin the country, right? Then what happens is the very next day, same dude goes to Salt Lake City, okay? He claims that there's 57 such communist members in the State Department. Well, what is it? Is it 205? Is it 57? Is it 971? The answer is they didn't fucking know. It was probably one dude, okay? Maybe it was two, but they didn't know. But again, never waste a good crisis, right? This is something that we talk about in the Libertarian Book Club when we went through Anatomy of the State. The idea that the elites, the state, they need to make you think that you're fighting for your own safety, right? When in reality, it's just a challenge to their power, that they want you to fight on their behalf. You're not in it with them. To quote or paraphrase George Carlin, it's a big club, but you ain't in it, okay? But they want you to think you are. They want you to think that the threat is against you, right? So McCarthy brings up this basically witch hunt. And it starts in the State Department, it starts in like the FBI, and then it starts to move into other areas of our culture, to the point where Hollywood itself was looking for communist spies and operatives that were forcing propaganda into pop culture in the United States. Well, what's reality? Reality is that when you don't waste a good crisis, maybe you do have one or two or three infiltrators, but let's make everyone think it's thousands. And then what we do is we take anyone who is anti the military-industrial complex. We take anyone who is anti the things that we were doing in other countries and basically the pissing match that we're having with Russia and other powers at the time. Anyone who's anti that is a fucking commie. They're a red. We need to get rid of them, right? But so there's these speeches that McCarthy goes through that obviously are manufactured because they have bullshit numbers in them. All right, so then what happens? Well, PBS, I love looking at old propaganda cartoons, right? This is actually back when reporters were fucking reporters, by the way, okay? Cartoonists were some of the best. Political cartoonists were fantastic at encapsulating the hypocrisy of government. They don't do that anymore. There are independent cartoonists that do that now. But if you look at some of the political cartoons that come out of, the Wall Street Journal and shit, it is an abomination. But so this one that you're looking at right now is, you read books, huh? Right? And they're questioning this poor woman that's probably works in the State Department or some other agency. And on the attaché case, it says State and Local Anti-Subversive Committee, right? We are making sure that you're not subverting the American way and democracy in this country. Got another one in a court of law. We have dudes standing up going, we now have new and important evidence. And it's just some dude who wrote on a fence that they're bringing in as evidence that Joe Zilch is a red, right? Evidence. He must be a commie, right? What else? We got the Committee on Un-American Activities, right? We don't want any un-Americans around here. That would be awful. And if they're un-American, they must be a commie. Sound familiar? If you're not anti-racist, you're a racist, right? If you're not pro-America, you're an un-American. This is the Committee on Un-American Activities. It's okay, we're just hunting commies, and guess what? We're running over people, killing them, taking away their livelihoods, smearing their good name for the rest of their lives. It's all right, but we're hunting communists. It's very important work, right? Here's the last one they have on this one. This is another series of basically, cartoons and posters that were put up, propaganda that were put up. And this isn't just the U.S. This is throughout the world, mind you, right? Again, sound familiar? A lot of these movements are worldwide. In the past, you didn't hear that it was worldwide. In the past, you heard just what was happening in your country. It's not until the advent of, overseas communications, telephones, and more importantly, social media that you begin to find out that this shit is happening in other places. But this is a collection from around the world, right? The Red Menace, okay? We've got the socialist demon basically choking out prosperity in Great Britain, right? Throttling the country. We have vignettes of basically communist skeletons sitting on tops of horses walking across dead bodies, right? Now, here's the thing. I am not saying that socialism and communism is this great thing and that it shouldn't be talked about for what it is. What I am saying is that these motherfuckers, look at this, if Russia should win, if Russia wins and the communists should win, the next World War, many American men will be sterilized, right? Just ridiculous, outlandish shit. I married a communist, right? God forbid I married a communist. I'm going to cause the end of the American Republic or democracy. They use these outlandish and outsized things. Like, we can have an intellectual conversation, and anyone who knows me or regularly listens and watches my stuff, you all know I don't believe in socialism. I don't believe in communism. I think it is a complete train wreck of an ideology. The problem is that, as opposed to having an intellectual conversation, propaganda takes this shit and weaponizes it. Weaponizes it against the very people in this country that might just have an opposing view. And it gets broadened to the point where you don't even have to be a communist. You're just someone who speaks out logically against whatever the popular opinion is at the time, and now you're a communist. Or if you speak out and say, you know what, that over there, it doesn't seem like it's very racist, you're a racist, you're a white supremacist, you're a nationalist, right? That's exactly the game plan. So that's the Red Scare, all right? Now, what's funny is most of this stuff, like, we've been fighting the same war, I think, since World War II. Like, the shit that we're dealing with today are reverberations from the Cold War and reverberations from World War II and the fallout from that era. I thought was absolutely funny was, I think it was Thomas Massey today who shared something on Twitter. I forget if it was like a retweet or whatnot. But he basically said, look, if we can go ahead and impeach presidents who are no longer the president, I call dibs on impeaching FDR. Well, FDR and Wilson, I think, have had more of a negative impact on this country and the world than pretty much any other president, probably all the other presidents combined, believe it or not, because they essentially started us on this trend. The Cold War starts basically mid-50s, and it ends up going through the 80s and early 90s, right? So the Cold War is essentially, again, it's this two biggest dudes in the schoolyard jockeying for position. Will they fight? Will they kill everyone? Nuclear weapons are involved, okay? There's also a narrative about whether or not the United States actually had to drop nukes at the end of World War II, or whether or not it was just a beating of the chest to show the commies that, they better not mess with us after the war. We got the bomb, right? So Cold War propaganda cartoons. We have, we got Khrushchev and Nasser essentially stirring the pot within the Middle East, and we're basically saying that communists are creating, an awful environment and also a militant environment in the Middle East, and we shouldn't allow them to do that. That's scary. Well, here's like the bitter irony, okay? The bitter irony. First of all, why? Why would we care about that? Well, we would care about that because the Middle East has a bunch of fucking oil, and the United States was really dependent upon oil, right? So propaganda. They're trying to make you think something is the devil when really they could just try and appeal to you intellectually, and they don't, okay? Now, they're sprinkling some military aid into the Middle East, causing a problem. Does that sound fucking familiar? How long ago is that? 70 years? 64 years? And we're complaining that Russians and other people are basically profiting from military aid going to the Middle East, causing conflict and radicalizing things and destabilizing the region. And then we've got Trump in front of the American people going, this is the biggest, I can't do a good Trump impression, this is the biggest arms deal like in fucking U.S. history to Saudi Arabia. Like, it's a big deal, it's an amazing deal, it's a great deal. Like, dude, does no one see the awful irony of this shit? Like, it's just history ends up repeating itself over and over again. Part of the reason why I say that Wilson and FDR have contributed to the conflicts of the present is the Cold War begets some of the shit that we got into in Afghanistan, where the CIA basically trained and funded Osama bin Laden. Okay, the funding and the training that went to that group was to fight Soviets, all right? It's this shit, just 30, 40, 50 years, 60 years in the future, and we're still dealing with it, okay? The Cold War, right? Red China, we have to worry about Red China. We still have to worry about Red China. And there are still a bunch of boomer neocons out there. Sorry if you fit this bill, but you're in here. Like, we're worried China's going to take over the world because they're going to attack. They're not going to attack anyone. They're going to take us over because they're going to basically create a machine of economics to beat us out. That's what they're going to do. And we don't do anything to counteract it. And the counteract is to do free market, right? The counteraction is to unleash the free market, to beat them out, to outpace them, right? But we don't do that. We do the exact opposite. And back then, we were worried that the Reds were coming. They were going to basically, invade and part of what was the movie Red Dawn, right? Is Russian, and it's Cuba, and it's like worried about the Chinese, screaming Chinamen and stuff like that. Like, all of that is just piled into this bullshit. A lot of it ends up being war propaganda, but you're going to notice as time goes on, it's not necessarily war propaganda anymore. They stop talking about that shit. What they end up start talking about, the Gulf War and stuff like that was weapons of mass destruction and all that bullshit. But, that war propaganda has now turned into more ideological opponents domestically. It's turned into people that would be upstarts, that would speak out against the government and what it's doing. And you see that happening real time with people that supported Trump. And whether they did it intelligently or they did it for the right reasons or not is immaterial. The one thing we should be worried about is the fact, and libertarians have seen it spill over in record time with Tom Brennan coming out and lumping us in with fascists and insurrectionists and seditionists. It's like they use that propaganda to just create the biggest umbrella possible to take all the malcontents and try and remove them or silence them or ostracize them. And that's exactly what they're doing. So we got Dan chiming in saying that's a sick hack, great fashion taste. Yes, it is. And I appreciate the Blue Star Union guys putting this together. So, by the way, I don't make any money off that. So don't worry, I'm not getting a vig here. All right, so we talked about the Cold War. Here's, all right, now let's talk about the Civil Rights Movement, all right? Let's talk about 50s leading into the 60s, and we're talking about, racial tensions, at the same time that we're fighting the perceived threat of communism and Soviets and all this other stuff, we also have issues at home, right? We have still segregationist policies that are rampant in certain areas. We have certain problems that are riots and race riots and things like that are being exacerbated by the fact that we're not paying attention to the problems we legitimately have. We're paying attention to the, threats to the seats of power instead of actually taking care of the people that make up this country. So one of these cartoons that struck me was, we're basically talking about things like extremism and bombs and riots, essentially killing racial accord in the country. And I don't know what this angle is. It basically says in 1963, nonviolent civil protests in Birmingham, Alabama, met with mass arrests, excessive use of force, and bombings. Right? It's basically saying that the peaceful protests trying to bring people together were met with, extremists and bombs and riots that essentially disrupted what could have been something amazing. And it has to make you ask the question, was it calculated? Right? Like, was it something that was known to have been occurring, or maybe even, God forbid, facilitated by certain groups that had something to gain or something to not lose by racial equality happening? The answer is yes, and I don't have any hard and fast evidence to bring forward in this talk. But again, this just shows you how those aspects of how propaganda can be just not just damaging, like it can be catastrophic. It can be catastrophic to a people. And we struggle with that right now. The fact that we're being divided and conquered, and it's like we're at each other's throats, and there's a common boogeyman. But it's not the boogeyman that the government would have us think it is. It's the boogeyman is the government. All right. But so this is another example of how we're revisiting the same problems over and over and over again, because we don't fix shit. We just find a new way to find a new boogeyman to fight. We don't fix the problems of the past. What else do we have? Oh, Black Panthers. This is a good one. Hold on. Before I moved on to this one, let's see. Yeah, this is a good point. So my brother chiming in. New wartime propaganda is created by and perpetuated by big corporations, global monopolies, because most first world countries are broke as fuck. That's a perfect example of how we don't have free market capitalism right now. I'm going to leave that up. That's hugely poignant. We don't have free market capitalism right now. We have corporatism. We have crony capitalism. Okay? It is the complete antithesis to free market. It is essentially government-aided cartels, and that synergy or that connectedness between government and those companies create an incentive for those companies to use government as its talking box, right? Like I don't want to put anyone on blast, but say it was Coca-Cola or Pepsi or one of these drink manufacturers, and say they felt like their market share was threatened, internationally by something. Okay, if they came out and said there's communists around, we need to stop them, right? Or if they came around and said Muslims from other countries are ruining this country, we need to send them back, right? If it was one of those companies saying that, people would be like, fuck you just want to make money, right? But when it's a government official saying it, that comes from a, Department of Defense position or the state, okay, that shit makes it seem like it's a survival thing, and it's not. It's not a survival thing. It's still us and them. But the corporates figured out that if they send I call them sock puppets. If they send their sock puppets out in front of the American people and the sock puppets say something, it can actually catch on. Because they think, oh, we elected them. They're looking out for us. They want to save and preserve the country and democracy. Well, if they do that, then that corporation gets to hide in the shadows, right? Like that basically deep state or that dark money that gets into politics. That's exactly what it is. Steve's completely right. It's corporate welfare is what it is. It's essentially, and I'll even go beyond that. It's not just welfare. It's fucking extortion, dude. Like it is companies that have conspired with government officials or conspired together to buy government officials to extract wealth from the majority of Americans. And actually the majority of people in this fucking world, okay? They basically steal wealth, and they do it in such a stealthful way that it's really sickening. Like, it is sickening. That propensity for government officials to be bought, there's actually, so again, like you always have to kind of take everything with like a grain of sand or whatever the saying is, right? So you have to apply a filter to things. But what one of the series that I watched like a couple of years ago was The Men Who Made America, right? And it's basically a bunch of robber barons is essentially what they're talking about, right? Carnegie, who else is in there? You know, Rockefeller, right? Like they talk about Standard Oil. These motherfuckers band together to buy a president. Okay, and then what happened was, I forget who it was Johnson or someone. The president dies, right? And then the reason why they wanted to buy the president was because they needed to stop the dude who they ended up putting in the VP spot from pushing, I guess it was Sherman or someone pushing antitrust legislation against Standard Oil, right? And against the railroads, saying that they were monopolies. Now, truthfully, those businesses weren't monopolies, but there were government-aided actions and things that helped them become almost legitimate monopolies. It wasn't just the fact that they outcompeted everyone. Now, to preserve their place within, to preserve their market share, they had to conspire to buy a president. And it was because the other alternative was, all right, we got to split up. So our only recourse is to buy a president. And then it blows up in their face because the president dies and the VP does what they were afraid of all along. Which, by the way, interestingly enough, nowadays, Standard Oil has been reassembled, man. Like, there's no antitrust. Like, the fact that there's antitrust laws on the books is a fucking shame. Like, I don't even, it's a farce. It's a farce. Right? Like, those antitrust laws, they don't get applied. And the reason why they don't get applied is because the people that would have to vote to apply them they're on the take. Like their campaign funds and coffers are filled by the same people that they would have to try and downsize. The other end of it is, even if they're not on the take, the people that they would end up downsizing are their talking pieces. They are their distribution mechanism. Just look at the synergy between the larger technology companies and the government. Those things are so intertwined that when on Capitol Hill they have, they got Zucks and they got, Jack and all the rest of them up there, and they're like, grilling them about their antitrust activities. It's bullshit. It's a fucking circus. It's bullshit. They're not legitimately grilling them about whether or not they have a monopoly. They're not grilling them about anything. They do things to show that they're tough, right? And then there's no teeth behind it. Nothing happens. Right? So that's basically it. That's all they do. They put on a show to make you think that they're working for you, when truthfully it's like before the meeting, they're like, Mark, I'm going to be really difficult on you, okay? Don't take it personally. Like, we're still good, but I'm going to yell at you for the next 45 minutes. And Mark's like, yeah, sure, whatever. That's okay. Another $1 billion just hit my account. I couldn't give a fuck, right? That's exactly what happens, all right? Sorry, it was a little bit of a rant. Thank you very much for the comments. That's exactly, you guys are spot on, right? All right, so let me throw this back up here. All right, so Red Scare, Cold War. Where does that get us to? That gets us to the Black Panthers and the racial unrest that happened in the late 60s that results in the Civil Rights Movement, okay? The Black Panthers is a perfect example of things that happened in the past that now are repeating themselves in the present, okay? The Black Panthers, for anyone who is unfamiliar with them, okay, many of them were pro-socialist, right? Many of them saw capitalism, and again, me speaking to libertarians and liberty-minded and Ron Paul-minded people understand that the capitalism that the Black Panthers were railing against is not capitalism. Right? It was, even back then, it was cronyism, right? It was corporate cronyism. So many of them turned to socialist teachings and thoughts because they felt like it was the only way to like transition away from this game that was rigged against them. I can't blame them, right? And in a country that has the First Amendment, you get to believe whatever the fuck you want, okay? Just as long as you're not killing people or taking their shit. Well, in this case, the government, mostly white males who did not want to give up much ground in terms of racial equality, decided that what they were going to do was they were going to take the Black Panthers, and actually there's an interesting story about the Deacons for Defense that precede the Black Panthers. Deacons for Defense were actually founded pre the Black Panther Party. Look it up on YouTube. Not a very high fidelity recording of the movie, but if you look up the Deacons for Defense, fantastic film. I think it's what's the actor's name? He was in Crying Game and Forrest Whitaker. Okay, Forrest Whitaker's in it. It happens in Louisiana, okay, and it has to do with basically Second Amendment rights for Black Americans that were not given the ability to vote. They weren't given an equal say in their government, both locally as well as federally. And so they essentially used the Second Amendment, which should have applied to them, and it does because it's a natural right, used the Second Amendment and armed themselves to stop the ridiculousness that was happening to them and the oppression, okay? Well, they preceded the Black Panther Party. The powers that be see the civil rights movement coming, right? They see it coming, they see it building, and they say, all right, how do we hold it off? Well, the first thing that we do is we try and demonize the Black Panthers, who are the most militant of the folks fighting for civil rights in this country. We demonize them. We turn them into the same way we did with those damn dirty commies. We talk about, we say that they're socialists. We say that they're Reds. We say that they're going to destroy democracy. We say that they're terrorists, right? And now, that being said, a couple of the Black Panthers were violent, okay? In most of the cases, when Black Panthers were violent, it was because they were aggressed upon. It was in self-defense. But you got to remember, when the tide of public opinion is against you, no one gives a fuck, right? Like, they don't care. If you're violent and the media and the government paints you as this violent criminal or animal or terrorist, they're going to think like, oh, they were violent. They deserved it, right? That's it. That's all the people that are like, thin blue line, no matter what. No matter what, it doesn't matter, right? That's the same exact mentality. There were a few Black Panthers that took it into their own hands, and they went against what the Black Panthers stood for. The Black Panthers stood first and foremost for defending rights that they felt like they had, okay? So it was a defensive thing. They armed themselves and stood out on state capitol buildings because they were there to make sure that their people were not aggressed upon. And just to show you how their fears were not completely irrational, okay, Fred Hampton, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, excuse me for, I have to end up finding a way to get rid of these advertisements, but Fred Hampton, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party and one of the most notable members of the Black Panther Party, was essentially assassinated, along with a ton of other civil rights leaders. So you ask yourself, well, why did these people feel like they needed to arm themselves? Because they were getting fucking killed. That's why. And the media was painting them as devils. They were painting them as people that were trying to undermine America and undermine American democracy, because they didn't like the racial repercussions and the racial equity repercussions that came with it, okay? Now, again, this doesn't give any of the Black Panthers a freedom to do whatever the hell they want. You can't just aggress upon someone because you feel like you're in the right. But in the cases where they were defending themselves, they were completely warranted in that. And the government took that crisis, they took that opportunity to demonize these people. And in many cases, like the FBI was extremely forthright about saying, yep, we got that son of a bitch. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Someone who's basically fighting for the rights and the equality of fellow Americans, the FBI, who is supposed to be basically a subservient to the American people, is beating its chest over killing someone who is a part of this movement because the propaganda painted him as a socialist and as a defiler of democracy. All right, another one. December 4th, 1969. A couple of members assassinated. I think there was also Fred, and then Mark Clark was the other one. Age 21 and 22. Shot to death by 14 police officers. There are different stories about how this went down, but many of the stories tell the account that's similar to some of the other Black Americans that have been killed recently by police violence, similar to the stories that followed Duncan Lemp in the Boogaloo movement, and a number of other people throughout history where the police and law enforcement essentially say, well, they stood their ground, or they fired at us, or they tried to shoot us. And in many cases, there's opposing viewpoints that say, no, that motherfucker was sleeping. He was in his pajamas, and they killed him. Now, you don't know the truth, but the truth is that these people have been demonized, and they've been done to such a huge scale that there's obviously not something that smells right about this. And there's obviously alternative motives. The last thing I'm going to say about this is that there was this program, and if you haven't heard of it, it's called COINTELPRO. All right, COINTELPRO was something that was put in place in 1956. It was basically a series of covert and illegal. Let me say that again. Again, this is on Wikipedia, so take it for what it is. But illegal projects conducted by the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic American political organizations, specifically geared towards the social equality and civil rights movement. I can't even, what was the one with the gun running, right? Like the ATF and the gun running. That happened in Mexico, right? Where they basically handed out illegal firearms to people that they knew were going to use for nefarious purposes, and essentially resulted in the killing and the death of many people. Fast and the Furious, there you go, right? That was Holder, right? Eric Holder's brainchild under Obama, right? One of the best American presidents, right? Under Obama. Fast and Furious. So COINTELPRO is one of the predecessors to that, right? COINTELPRO is basically the FBI saying, well, you know what? We're going to do illegal shit, but it's okay. We can do the illegal shit because it's to protect the American way of life. Bullshit. You're not, if anyone should be held to the letter of the law, at the people that should be held to the letter of the law the most are public servants and elected officials. If you draw your income from me and my tax money, if you draw your income because you are a member of the government that's supposed to fulfill a certain position, it is your job to follow the law to the fucking letter. That's why everyone, and again, I don't make fans on either side for various reasons, one of which is I will call you on your bullshit no matter what. A ton of people were calling for U.S. senators, mostly Republicans, to be like, no, we're not going to recognize the electors. You don't get to fucking do that. We get to do that. Senators don't get to do that. They are elected officials. They need to abide by the letter of the law. They don't get to make decisions on the fly. We do. As Americans, as free individuals, we get to evaluate whether or not we think something is unconstitutional, and then we can deal with the ramifications of those actions. Elected officials, they don't get to. They need to be held to it. And as someone who is not a gigantic fan of the Constitution anymore, if we're gonna be saddled with it, you better fucking follow it. And they don't. And we have people within our country that call for people like this to do sadistic shit, to do underhanded illegal operations that kill Americans, that, like the Patriot Act and the NDAA, that will black bag them and hold them indefinitely without any charge, without any representation, without any due process. That's absolutely abhorrent. You're not allowed to do that. If an American citizen does it, it's bad enough. If you are someone who is sworn to uphold it, you've now gone way above and beyond because you fucking swore to uphold that shit. And you decided that it was for the greater good that you were going to go rogue and do whatever the hell you wanted. COINTELPRO is one of the predecessors of every one of the other intelligence communities' illegal programs that they have owned and operated. Snowden blew the whistle, and that motherfucker will rot in Moscow or somewhere else until the rest of his days. He won't be allowed back. He won't be allowed back. And it's because these people feel like they get to make it up on the fly. If they can justify it, they get to make it up. You call them on their shit, you're the enemy. You're the devil, and they will make you look like the devil. Bryce said, when the courts side with them, elected officials are emboldened to stretch their legal arms beyond the base. Yes, that's a perfect example. When we, this past week, when we did our overview of Anatomy by the State by Murray Rothbard, okay, one of my first big takeaways was courts are what give cover to the excesses and the overreach and basically the crimes of the state and the crimes of government. It makes you think that if the court said it's okay, then it's okay. It's bullshit. The people in the court have been appointed by the very people that they're supposed to oversee and hold to task. It's bullshit. Operation Northwoods, blow up commercial airlines, terror acts, and invade Cuba, MK Ultra. Yes, and yes. All that shit. This stuff has been going on forever, and we allow this stuff to happen time and time again, and all these people get at worst is a slap on the hands. And when it gets blown up, what happens? One token person goes to prison. One token person might get the book thrown at them. Everyone else will get off scot-free. Scot-free. All right, before I go on, I have a couple more current examples. I actually have 2 quotes, and then I have a short little trailer to play for you for something that I'm working on that's a side project that you all should definitely check out. But before I get going, here's 2 quotes that you need to remember, all right? The quote, one is from Huey Newton, again, a big member of the Black Panther Party, said, "An unarmed people are slaves or are subject to slavery at any given moment." That's a member of the Black Panther Party saying that. The first gun control laws were racist, and every gun control law after that is fucking racist. Remember that. Every single one of them. The other quote I have for you is from J. Edgar Hoover. And this is from a report, I believe, called Racial Intelligence on the Black Panther Party. It was published in 1969. He says, "You state that the Bureau should not attack programs of a community interest, such as the Black Panther Party's Breakfast for Children. You have obviously missed the point. This program was formed by the Black Panther Party for obvious reasons, including their efforts to create an image of civility, assume community control of Negroes, and to fill adolescent children with their insidious poison. This was a food program for children in schools put on by the Black Panther Party." And he said that it is to poison their minds. Like fucking government schools don't poison minds. I'll be back in 1 second. There are so many reasons to decentralize. Whether it's lack of control over your own data, platforms where you are the product and get paid little to no money, or censorship and government oversight into your personal communications. That's why I'm taking a journey to decentralize my social media as well as my life. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and check out the Decentralize Everything playlist on this channel. Whether you're curious or looking to decentralize too, I would love your company as I make a move to break free, take control, and decentralize everything. So yeah, after this episode, you might have to find me on the blockchain because if I'm out walking free, you might have to find me on the blockchain. I am putting together that program to basically follow me on a journey in conjunction with Nick, who chimed in earlier, and a number of the other Liberty crew here from New Jersey, to put together a presence on the Hive blockchain for Liberty-minded people. That playlist is on the YouTube channel, so make sure to subscribe to it and hit the notification bell so that you see when those new videos come out. All right, so we're going to talk about some more present-day examples of boogeymen that have been created and essentially demonized, but not for the purposes of protecting the American people, for basically crowding out or stopping other, how should I put, threats to government power. All right? The big one, or at least one of the biggest ones in U.S. history, is COVID. All right? Here's one of the initial headlines. This is from New York Times. Incalculable loss, right? Right off the bat, incalculable. Almost like, what does that make you think? Makes you think like infinite, right? Like catastrophic. We're all going to fucking die, right? Incalculable loss. New York Times covers front page with 1,000 COVID-19 death notices. 1,000 fucking notices of people that died, their names in the paper, okay? Now, I am not saying that these people should not be mourned. I'm not saying that their deaths were inconsequential. Death is awful. No one should champion it. No one should cheer it, okay? Regardless of what the person did while they were alive. Even like the worst people of all time, when they die, okay, you can feel relief, but you don't celebrate death. You don't. Life is too precious. You don't celebrate death. They put 1,000 people's names, okay? And the idea was U.S. deaths near 100,000. An incalculable loss. Well, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. But the problem is numbers are relative, right? And to reduce people to numbers is very cold, but at the same time, you can't get away from it. Like, you can't ever not include statistics within things like public health, or just within putting things in fucking perspective. So 100,000 people sounds like a lot of people. Like, they try to make you imagine it, like in terms of the number of jetliners that would have to simultaneously crash. I get it. Right now, we're nearing 400,000 people that have died from COVID, all right? But let me put it in perspective. Last year, in the United States, 655,000 people died from heart disease. That's 1 out of every 4 deaths. 655,000 people. Where were the 1,000 names of people who died from heart disease in the New York Times last year? Did they post those names? Did they post 10 of them? Did they post 5 of them? They didn't post fucking any, because there wasn't a political narrative that it needed to fit. Let me show you something else. This is not just, again, our problems are not just the United States. This is global shit that's going on. This is the BBC from August. Coronavirus, is the world winning the pandemic fight? They show a chart that says global cases approaching 20 million, okay? First thing I want to point out is, even though the cases approach 20 million, they still couldn't manipulate this graph enough to make the death line, which is the red right here, look significant. What does that fucking tell you? The people at the BBC could not manipulate the data enough on the chart to make the death line look significant. Now, it does symbolize hundreds of thousands of deaths, but they're trying to now focus away from that, and they want to focus on 20 million. It's a big fucking number. 20 million people got sick. Holy shit! We're all gonna die, right? But would you know that every single year in the world, 1 billion cases of flu happen? I'm going to say that again. 1 fucking billion cases of flu every year. And they want to focus on 20 million cases of coronavirus. Do some math. That is literally 50 times as much flu. So then you say, oh, well, the flu isn't as important because it doesn't cause as many deaths. Oh, really? 3 to 5 million people have severe cases where most of them end up having to be hospitalized. 3 to 5 million have to be hospitalized. 20 million cases, that's not the number of severe cases, right? That's 20 million cases total in the entire fucking world. Of that 3 to 5 million with the flu that have severe cases, 300,000 to 650,000 annually die from the flu. I'm going to say that again. 290 to 300,000 to 650,000 people die from influenza every single year. But they don't want you to focus on that. They want you to focus on the perceived devil of coronavirus. What you also don't see here is how many flu cases have been reported in the world while corona's going on. It's less. Viruses fight for hosts. There's been much less flu in the world as a result of it. But they don't want you to focus on that. But it is an existential threat. It's going to kill all of us. We're all going to die. So you need to give us executive and emergency powers. We need to take away your rights so that we can protect you from, 20 million people. Oh, shit, we're all going to die. We got to protect you, okay? Here's another headline. Cato. Take of it what you will. The libertarians will say that Cato is a bunch of sellouts. There are some parts of Cato's publications and studies that are still, not bootlicking, but I think this serves the point because it's echoed in other publications throughout the world. How one model simulated 2.2 million U.S. deaths from COVID. This is in April, okay? Near the beginning of the COVID outbreak. But it was a model called the Imperial Model that came out of London, that came out of England, that showed 2.2 million people in the United States were going to die from COVID. 2.2 million people. And would you know that months after that shit was debunked and the numbers got reverted and reverted and reverted, and at one point in time it dropped as low as just under 200,000, which, by the way, isn't that far from reality if you believe the numbers, because the 400,000 number we're looking at right now coincides with 2 flu seasons, not 1. Also something you have to remember. But so 2.2 million potential deaths from COVID. They use that number for a specific reason. It's fucking scary. It's a devil. It's something for you to fear and to cower about. You have to stay inside. You have to wear a mask. We're all going to die. Remember that. This, if anything, and I cut this video and it lives on after this day, I want this to be preserved for posterity. The ridiculous nature to which they use propaganda to manipulate and steal rights. They kill people. They wage wars. Just awful, awful shit that they do. What's the next one? Well, recently, all of a sudden, we had a presidential election. Holy shit. COVID's not that big of a deal anymore. Even His Majesty, Andrew Cuomo, says that New York must reopen the economy. He said, we simply cannot stay closed until the vaccine hits critical mass. The cost is too high. Welcome to 9 fucking months ago, Andrew. 9 fucking months ago, people were saying this. They were basically saying that you could not have a cure that was worse than the actual illness itself. They used the 2.2 million number to be able to do all of the shit that they've done up until now. It is exactly like, I wish I had a cut of V for Vendetta, when it's basically the Chancellor Sutler saying, remind them why they need us. Right? Like, it is so fucking poignant. This guy, all of a sudden, wants to reopen New York after he's decimated the job market, after he's decimated small businesses and basically sold them out to Amazon and Google and Walmart and Target. And he's doing it at a time, and this is how you know it's fucking bullshit. These are the numbers. You can find them on Google. Just look up COVID infection numbers by state. Put in the state of your choosing. New York, let's see, recently, at the worst of it, let's see, we had cases that were, 10,000 a day to 11,000 a day. Now, all of a sudden, we got numbers that are like 14, 13, 15,000 cases a day. Why are we opening up, Andy? If things sucked so bad back then, why do we have to open up now? Let's look at California. It's not just Cuomo. Let's look at California. California's numbers are elevated too. They make last year look like fucking child's play. But now they're opening up because it's not as big of a perceived problem because it doesn't fit the fucking narrative anymore. There's a new narrative. The narrative is unity. We got to get the economy back going again because we have a new president. We need the president to look good. And this shows it. The numbers are higher. And all of a sudden they want to open back up again. All the while, they were telling you that these people that wanted to open up despite elevated infection numbers were looking to kill fucking grandma. This motherfucker put sick people in the nursing homes with the highest risk people. 25 to 40% of the deaths from COVID came from nursing homes, came from the elderly population that were affected by infected individuals going into those closed environments. And we still allow ourselves to think that they know better. They don't. But they will create this devil every time to make you think that you need to listen to them and that they can take away your rights and freedoms. Here's some new ones. Really new ones. Remember the Black Panther Party? Remember how, it was socialists and communists and terrorists. They're gonna kill all of us. They're gonna bring socialism here, right? Domino theory, McCarthyism, lasting for decades, still exists now. Boomers still parrot this shit. Well, now we got the Boogaloo Boys. I mentioned it at the beginning. If you haven't seen Jimmy Dore's interview with Magnus from the Boogaloo Boys, do watch it. Please watch it. So many fucking people are commenting on this video saying that Jimmy Dore entertained an extremist. They didn't watch the damn interview. They didn't hear what this guy had to say. They just look at the name and they think it's bad. The same as fucking white people back in the 60s who thought if you said you were a part of the Black Panther Party, that you were awful, that you were a terrorist, that you were treasonous. The Boog is not like that. And like the Black Panther Party, there are a handful of people from the Boogaloo Boys that are pissed off that the Boog wasn't able to rein back in. They weren't able to keep tabs on them, because everywhere they go, they end up getting cut off. They end up getting censored because they're an extremist group and they're advocating for domestic terrorism. A bunch of dudes with fucking beards hanging out on the Capitol steps, exercising their natural right to defend themselves with firearms. Terrorists, trying to overthrow the country, trying to destroy democracy. The Boog movement by the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, key points. I just want to point this out. This is how they characterize these Americans. The Boog movement is an anti-government extremist movement, extreme, that formed in 2019. In 2020, Boogalooers increasingly engaged in real-world activities as well as online activities, showing up at protests and rallies around gun rights, pandemic restrictions, and police-related killings. Look at this last fucking line. That's not terrorist activity. That's fighting the fucking state. I almost want that to hang in the air for a while. That's not terrorist activity. That's fighting back against an oppressive government. But it's being positioned as if they're terrorists because they are anti-oppression and anti-authoritarianism. The term Boogaloo slang reference to a future civil war. This is one that they love. Like, I feel like somewhere, some like social justice warrior gets a boner every single time they use the phrase future civil war. Okay? The term Boogaloo is a slang reference to a future civil war, a concept Boogalooers anticipate and even embrace. Have these people not been fucking paying attention for the last 12, 18 months? People that are talking about secession and decentralizing are talking about that because they don't want it to get to the point of civil war. That's what these people say. They prepare just in case. They expect the worst and hope for the best. But people who aren't in the Boog are even saying this. They are saying if you don't wake up to the fact that authoritarians rule your life and that you're not free and you have no liberty, it will come to a civil war. And it's not going to be two-sided. It'll be every man for themselves. There will be these small tribal groups that are fighting for certain aspects of their life. 1 or 2 or 3 different policy points or aspects to their freedom and the way that they want to run their own life. But they try and say that these people, they say that they reference a future civil war. What they're trying to make you think is that they are working to create it. It's bullshit. The ideology of the Boogaloo movement is still developing, but is primarily anti-government, good, anti-authority, fucking fantastic, and anti-police in nature. They're not socialists, they're not commies, they're not terrorists, they're not trying to blow up prime targets. They're anti the shit that most people in America are against. But they're trying to create a devil. They marched alongside of people at the Black Lives Matter protests, partly to demonstrate that they were against oppressive police action in certain instances. They also marched alongside of them the same way for the same reason why the Deacons for Defense armed themselves, the same reason why the Black Panthers armed themselves. It was to protect them from being aggressed upon. They did not open fire. Any of the situations where there was gun-related violence, it was not them initiating. They were there for protection. Boogalooers rely on memes and in jokes. Here's the other thing. This is something that I find completely it's sickly funny. Okay, the advent of things like 4chan and stuff like that. We're going to be reading in the Libertarian Book Club. We're going to be reading this next book. We're going to be reading the New Right by Michael Malice. And the prominence of things like 4chan and the prominence of these like kind of dark comedy forces, not forces, I mean just like pockets of dark comedy in our lives that have grown out of necessity because, the woke movement and social justice warriors and stuff like that, basically they're killing sarcasm, right? Like the most recent thing that came out of Twitter, I should pull it up. It's like, anyone who's on Twitter who saw like the Twitter thing that's like, the example was, whales are robots that are sent here to like spy on people or whatever. Report that and put a note and all kinds of stuff. So now every sarcastic comment online is going to be reported. 4chan, a lot of the shit on there is just started to troll people. Not because it's a bad thing, not because they're trying to be nefarious or destroy people's lives or hurt people or undermine the government. 4chan's there ironically. Things like the Proud Boys come out of that. Symbolism of people poking fun at others that are not woke, but they say they are. They say they're woke, but they're not. They're just as asleep. And they're the people that walk around every single day and don't know. They don't know that the aliens are there. They're the ones that read the magazine, that see the subliminal advertising, and they buy into it. They say they're woke because they're part of the in crowd. They're not. They're the exact opposite. They're zombies. But in this case, we have situations where memes and symbolism of igloos and Hawaiian shirts are now dangerous. Because, if you're starting an insurgency, you want them to be easily identifiable by wearing Hawaiian shirts. Are you fucking kidding me? I can't even. This stuff, a lot of this, so most of the mainstream media is really good at taking one piece and then just regurgitating it everywhere else. And sometimes they make little tweaks and stuff like that, but anyone who's seen those movies where it's like the cuts of every single news station across the entire country telling the same story with the same words, with the same intonation, obviously trying to elicit the same emotional response. This is how this shit happens. Someone writes a piece, whether or not this is Robert Evans and Jason Williams writing this of their own accord, or whether they were directed to write it. This is a piece on Bellingcat that it's called "The Boogaloo Movement is Not What You Think." It is referenced in like almost every single other derivative article that comes out about the Boog. And every other article that comes out about the Boog, with the exception of a small few, focuses on the things that this dude tries to include that he doesn't understand about the movement, and paints as negative and scary and extremist. There are other things in here that talk about the fact that the more radicalized people, or people that would become radicalized, are drawn back in by people in the movement. I'm like, no, you don't go nuts. You don't go crazy. We're here for defense. We're here to protect ourselves and our families. That's what we're here for. But none of the derivative articles focus on that. They focus on the pieces that they can sensationalize the most. Now, Robert Evans and Jason Williams take a very, it's not one-sided, but it's like 90% negative, okay? There's another piece here by USA Today that's actually 50-50. Whoever wrote it gets some of the irony, that's included in the Boog, some of the irony and the imagery and the talk and stuff like that, they get it. They also identify that there were a couple of people that did some bad shit. But you know what? There have been people that have been parts of other organizations that have done bad shit too. People that have gone to church kill people. Right? Just because they are part of an organization does not make them representative of the entire organization. What's bitterly ironic is the number of people that for the entire summer, since May, that have been part of like Black Lives Matter and everything like that, they want to paint these groups as a monolith. And they spent the entire summer trying to fight against people painting them as a fucking monolith. They are not all the same. And the fact that you had one or two crazies does not mean that this organization is hell-bent on overthrowing the government. They are creating Boogie Men to try and create another Patriot Act style bill that will strip you of your rights. Anti-Defamation League. Now, Trump supporters and domestic terrorism. These things have become almost synonymous after January 6th. And they've actually taken that word, that phrase, domestic terrorist. They're now trying to stretch it as far as they can. It was already stretched really far. Right? With NDAA and the original Patriot Act, they already took like enemy combatant and domestic terrorist and all this shit, and they tried to take like a handful of people that were bad people that if you just applied the law to, it would have been fine, but they took it and tried to stretch it out and broaden it and put as many fucking people in there as possible. So now we have extremist attacks on democracy. The ADL has been monitoring extremist rhetoric surrounding the violence that erupted Wednesday at the U.S. Capitol. We've published a number of pieces about ongoing displays of anti-Semitism, right-wing extremism, and the mainstreaming of hate. There was an article today or yesterday that came out that said now being Jewish or Israel, because someone was carrying an Israel flag at the MAGA events, that being, Israel is now being supportive of Israel is now aligned with white supremacy. Are you fucking kidding me? How can people, you need to be smarter than this. You need to be smarter than this. You have to be able to see through this bullshit to be able to understand what they're trying to do. Capitol riots, 183 people have been charged in the Capitol insurrection so far. This searchable table shows them all. Remember back when I was showing you all the cartoons and stuff like that from McCarthy, where they were trying to root out all the communists? They would publish that shit. People got blacklisted. And it wasn't people that were hardcore commies or socialists. It was people that spoke out about one thing. They weren't in favor of one thing the government was doing. That's how they apply this shit. They expand the definition, they make you fear it, and then everyone that would even speak a little bit against it is now a devil. They are the worst incarnate thing of that thing that you fear, that they've trumped up the fear on, that they've escalated it up to 11. They are now the embodiment of that. Same thing with these people. And you know what? Some of them are assholes and they should go to jail. A lot of them are not. In fact, most of them are not. This is the ACLU. This is the world that we live in. This is pretty freaking interesting. The ACLU, and actually recently, we had Ilhan Omar with a moment of clarity as far as what might come from recent events. Ilhan Omar is even speaking out, saying that a new Patriot Act style bill should not be put through because it will be used nefariously. I do not side with her on almost anything that comes out of her mouth. It's one of the only things I can say I've agreed with her on. I think one of the other things was canceling the death penalty. So we've got two. Look, there's common ground. The ACLU, even the ACLU, typically a very liberal, left-leaning, progressive organization, has this article that came out. I forget what the date on this one is. Well, I don't have a publication date on this one. It's fairly recent. But it basically says how the USA Patriot Act redefines domestic terrorism. Section 802 of the U.S. Patriot Act expanded the definition of terrorism to cover domestic as opposed to international terrorism. A person engages in domestic terrorism if they do an act dangerous to human life, okay? Already relative speak. That is a violation of the criminal laws of a state. That's fine, but right, if it violates criminal laws, just fucking rack them up for violating the criminal laws. Like, why do we need more shit, right? Violates the criminal laws of the state or the United States if the act appears to intend to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Intimidate or coerce. Coerce. Influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion. Does that include, like, large gatherings of people? I don't know. To affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Well, I mean, look, if you commit mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, you're already fucking guilty of something. Why do we have to put that in here? Why does it matter? As someone who is on the record as saying I'm not in favor of hate laws or hate crimes because they're already fucking crimes. It doesn't stop you from committing a hate crime if you get 5 years versus 2 years. It does not. I can't remember the last time someone interviewed a criminal who's in prison who's like, well, I wish I had been able to do it, but, you know, it was labeled a hate crime, so, like, I didn't do it. Like, really? No, they don't fucking do that. No one thinks about it, right? So that last part, I don't even get, right? Mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. It's already illegal. Why is it got to be in there? The heart of this, okay, the idea of calling it patriotic is the invocation of this nationalism. This idea that if someone does something big, right, and what they want to try and say is violent, but the wording isn't just violent, right? So it uses the word coerce, right? If it's big, it threatens their authority position. That's what they're fighting against. They're trying to label people as domestic terrorists so it's not a threat to their authority, or so that if there is a threat to their authority or someone who speaks out against what they want to do, they can take them away or kill them without due process. A mainstay of American government and American way of life is due process. If you're going to have laws, you need to make sure that people get due process. The Patriot Act is an end around on that. There's also other elements here that are extremely freaking scary. It says here, the definition of domestic terrorism is broad enough to encompass the activities of several prominent activist campaigns and organizations. They include, this is the beautiful irony. Like, there's been like awful, sick, disgusting, dark irony throughout this entire episode. This is the beautiful irony, okay? When the lefties, okay, in this case, you're actually seeing like far left people now all of a sudden wake up. Like when Antifa is destroying Democrat offices because they identify Biden as also fascist, you're like, wow, maybe they're not completely brainwashed, right? Like maybe they do have a functioning part of their psyche that like identifies with, well, maybe they are kind of like thinking in the right direction. This is when people on the left that have been shouting like, you know, down with people on the right because they believe wrong, you know, and take away their rights and freedoms, all of a sudden they're like, holy fuck, they can do that to us too? It says the definition of domestic terrorism is broad enough to encompass the activities of several prominent activist campaigns and organizations, among them Greenpeace, Operation Rescue, the Vequas Island and WTO protesters, ELF, right, the Environmental Liberation Front, have all recently engaged in activities that could subject them to being investigated as engaging in domestic terrorism. Now, if those organizations do stuff that destroys property or hurts people, they're already in violation of criminal law. You don't need to pass another law. But the fact that they've broadened the definition to mean that these people's organizations, when they operate without doing those things, could be held as domestic terrorists, all of a sudden it's like, oh, light bulb. Maybe we shouldn't have been advocating for censure and censorship of these groups. Maybe we shouldn't have ostracized people that believe differently than us and called them domestic terrorists. Because the same shit can be done to us. This is the ACLU writing this. Conclusion. The ACLU does not oppose criminal prosecution of people who violate the law. Good. Even if they are doing it for political purposes. However, we do oppose the broad definition of terrorism and the ensuing authority that flows from that definition. Welcome to libertarian world 30 fucking years ago. When it wasn't you, you didn't have a problem with it. This is the take home. The take home is we have more in common than we have that makes us different. We all want to live a good life. We all want to raise our families. We all want to have fun. Some of us want to create a positive legacy on this planet. Leave things a little bit better than we found it. But we have powers right now that will demonize large groups of us because they're threatened. They're threatened. Something that came up recently is, within the Patriot Act, when the ACLU is talking about it, obviously they have a one-sided viewpoint, right? Their viewpoint is environmental organizations and animal rights organizations and things, right? Where they fail to connect the dots is things like red flag laws are the exact fucking same thing. Broad definitions of things that are dangerous. Give politicians the ability, and bureaucrats and even people that aren't elected, functionaries that have basically been ceded power that we don't even know who the hell they are, where they parade them out once and then they proceed to do things in the shadows without us being able to subject them to checks and balances. These groups, they look at these things, these broad definitions, and if the light is shining on other people, they're like, whatever, they deserve it. But then all of a sudden it's shown on them and they have a problem with it. They have to be able to connect those dots. And the same way in the other direction. If you're like a pro-gun conservative, pro-2A conservative, and you've been looking at Greenpeace and ELF and stuff like that, and you're like, they're domestic terrorists, they should be stopped. But the reason why you're saying it is because you disagree with them, and not because of their actual actions. You're in the same fucking boat, man. You got to connect those dots too. These things apply to us regardless of our political persuasion. They apply to us regardless of our religious affiliation, regardless of our cultural heritage, regardless of the states that we live in. These things are insidious, and they need to be routed out. They need, the only way that you fix this is you don't feed the beast. You don't feed into the hysteria. You don't buy into it. You don't rattle your pitchfork when everyone else does. You say, hey, these guys disagree with us. But it doesn't mean that they should be locked up or ostracized or censored. They don't have to go to another country. They live in a country that values their ability to voice their opinions, regardless of what they are. And as long as they're not violating your person or your property, you don't have to like it, but you also can't stop them. You can walk away. To paraphrase George Carlin again, when a bunch of people were really offended by what they used to see on TV in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s, they would write letters, right? And they'd write letters to basically the producers and the production companies, and they'd say, I take offense to, could be a dude, I take offense. I take offense to what I saw on your channel, Thursday at 6 o'clock. They said something that was offensive. And George Carlin used to say, oh yeah? If you have a problem with it, there's two knobs on the TV. One changes the channel, and the other one turns the fucking thing off.